Down in Louisiana, family is everything. So, when I got the invite to the family reunion, I packed my bags and headed down. Haven't seen those folks in years, but blood ties, you know? Arrived at the old family estate, a grand plantation house that's been in our family for generations. It started off like any reunion, hugs, laughter, and catching up. The whole family gathered for a feast, tables groaning under the weight of Southern delights. Fried chicken, gumbo, and pecan pie, the works. But as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows, the atmosphere shifted. Whispers buzzed through the family, secrets passed from one generation to the next. They led me to a dimly lit room, adorned with old portraits of ancestors. The air felt heavy with untold stories. That's when Aunt Mabel, with a solemn face, revealed the family tradition. Turns out, every reunion night, the family played a game, a twisted, nightmarish game. The matriarch, a role passed down, had to choose a sacrifice to appease some ancestral pact. A name drawn from a sacred urn, and that person, well, they became an offering to some dark force that supposedly protected the family. I stared at Aunt Mabel, thinking it was some kind of sick joke. But the fear etched on her face, the harsh tones of relatives, told a different story. They were bound by this horrifying tradition. As the night wore on, tension thickened. I overheard conversations in corners, hushed debates about who would be chosen. Panic lingered in the air, and I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. The once warm embraces now felt like a web closing in. The matriarch, a stoic figure with a gaze that pierced your soul, approached me. "It's your first reunion, dear. Tradition demands a sacrifice to protect the family. A pact with forces beyond our understanding." I protested, tried to reason, but the weight of generations pressed down on me. The family gathered, eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and acceptance. It was a nightmarish ballet, and I was the unwilling lead. The urn appeared, ancient and foreboding. The matriarch's hand dipped in, drawing out a slip of paper. My name, written in trembling letters, stared back at me. Panic set in, and I pleaded, begged for mercy. But the family, bound by this twisted tradition, looked on with resigned eyes. The night descended into a surreal horror. The family circled, chanting an eerie melody. I was led to a secluded area, the weight of their gazes an oppressive force. As the ritual unfolded, I felt a darkness closing in, a force that transcended the realms of reason. The matriarch raised a dagger, and I braced for the inevitable. The world blurred, and I could hear distant cries, a symphony of pain and despair. The blade descended, and everything went silent. I woke up the next morning, disoriented and covered in cold sweat. The reunion continued as if nothing happened. But the memories, the echoes of that twisted tradition, haunted me. It was a cycle, a nightmarish loop that threatened to consume each generation. I left Louisiana, severed ties with that family, but the echoes of that night followed me. A family bound by a horrifying tradition, a pact that demanded sacrifice to protect the bloodline. So, a few buddies and I decided to venture into the Louisiana bayou for a fishing trip. We were looking for that authentic experience, you know? Swampy waters, moss-draped trees, and the whole deal. We heard about this local guide, Old Man Thibodeau, who apparently knew those murky waters like the back of his hand. We met Thibodeau at the docks, a weathered man with a face etched with the tales of the bayou. He had this wild look in his eyes, like he'd seen things most folks would run away from. But hey, we thought it added to the authenticity, gave the trip a bit of a spooky edge. The day started normal enough. Thibodeau maneuvered the boat through the swamp, pointing out gators and exotic birds like a living encyclopedia. We caught a couple of fish, enjoyed the warm Louisiana sun, and everything seemed perfect. As evening crept in, that's when things got weird. Thibodeau, in his raspy voice, started telling us stories. Stories about the bayou, tales of mysterious disappearances, and legends of creatures lurking beneath the murky surface. At first, we brushed it off as local folklore, part of the show. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, Thibodeau's demeanor changed. He became jittery, eyes darting around like he expected something to jump out of the shadows. We should have felt uneasy, but the bayou at night, it's a whole different world. Thibodeau steered the boat into narrower, darker channels. The moonlight barely penetrated the dense canopy, casting eerie reflections on the water. That's when we started hearing it, whispers in the night, faint murmurs that seemed to echo through the swamp. Our laughter from earlier died down as Thibodeau led us deeper into the labyrinth of the bayou. The air grew thick with tension, and we exchanged uneasy glances. I asked Thibodeau about those disappearances he mentioned earlier, hoping it was just a dramatic narrative to spook the city folks. His response, though, sent shivers down our spines. He claimed the bayou demanded sacrifices, appeasements to some ancient force that ruled those waters. Sacrifices offered willingly or taken forcefully, he said with a sinister grin. That's when we realized this wasn't just a fishing trip. Thibodeau had a dark agenda, and we were at the mercy of the swamp's secrets. The boat slowed to a crawl, and Thibodeau's eyes gleamed with an unsettling hunger. Suddenly, he produced a rusty blade from his weathered jacket, and our hearts pounded in our chests. The whispers in the night grew louder, as if the bayou itself conspired against us. Panic set in, and we knew we had to escape this nightmare. In a moment of sheer adrenaline, we tackled Thibodeau, wrestled the blade away, and booked it. Through the tangled roots, under the looming branches, we ran like our lives depended on it because, in that twisted moment, they probably did. We stumbled back into the relative safety of the main channels, gasping for breath. The bayou, with its dark secrets, loomed behind us. Thibodeau, left stranded in the swamp, watched with that wild look in his eyes as we disappeared into the night. We reported the incident to the local police, but the bayou keeps its secrets. The disappearances, the sacrifices, it's all part of a dark dance that unfolds when the sun sets over the Louisiana swamp. We moved to this small town in Alabama, thinking it was the perfect place to raise our family. The town had that quaint charm, friendly neighbors, and a sense of community. Everything seemed normal until we crossed paths with Pastor Hargrove. He had this charisma that drew people in, a silver tongue that could convince you the sky was green if he wanted. Everyone in town spoke highly of him, calling him a savior in the heart of the community. We thought it was just the Southern hospitality thing, But soon, things started getting weird. The first Sunday service seemed typical, but as Pastor Hargrove preached, I felt this strange energy in the air. It was like he wasn't just speaking words, he was planting seeds in our minds. Seeds that took root and grew into this unshakable loyalty to the man. People started acting strange, following his every word like gospel. Our neighbors would gather in hush groups, talking about some divine plan only Pastor Hargrove understood. It felt like he had this hypnotic control over them, and we were outsiders witnessing something beyond our understanding. One night, I overheard a conversation at the local diner. The townsfolk spoke in hushed tones about the pastor's midnight sermons, hidden rituals, and strange happenings. Fear whispered through the air, but no one dared question Pastor Hargrove's authority. Things took a darker turn when our daughter mentioned the kids at school chanting strange phrases they learned from the pastor. It sent shivers down our spines, realizing that his influence reached even the youngest minds in town. We decided it was time to investigate. Late one night, We sneaked into the church to find clues about what was happening. The air inside was heavy, and the dimly lit sanctuary felt like a realm touched by something ominous. As we searched the pastor's office, we stumbled upon a hidden room, a chamber filled with peculiar symbols and unsettling artifacts. The walls were adorned with strange drawings, and the air in the room vibrated with an otherworldly presence. It was like we had uncovered a hidden layer of the town's reality, one that Pastor Hargrove kept concealed from prying eyes. Suddenly, we heard footsteps approaching, and panic set in. We hid in the shadows, watching as Pastor Hargrove entered the room with an eerie calmness. He spoke words in a language that sent shivers down our spines, invoking a presence that felt ancient and malevolent. We witnessed the townsfolk, eyes glazed over, entering the chamber one by one. They participated in a ritual that seemed to bind them to Pastor Hargrove's will. Fear clutched our hearts as we realized the depth of his influence and the darkness that lurked beneath the town's surface. In that moment, we understood that we were outsiders in a community under the sway of a charismatic leader with a sinister agenda. We had to leave, escape the grip of Pastor Hargrove's influence before it consumed us too. As we packed our bags, the town slept, oblivious to the eerie occurrences that unfolded in its midst. Leaving that small Alabama town felt like escaping a nightmare. So, I was on this trip to New Orleans, just exploring the city, checking out the jazz scene, and savoring some gumbo. It was all good vibes until I stumbled upon something I never expected. One night, while wandering through the French Quarter, I took a wrong turn down a narrow alley. The air got thick, and the distant sounds of revelry faded. It was like stepping into a different world. I thought, hey, this is the real deal, the gritty side of New Orleans they don't show in the brochures. As I walked deeper into the alley, the flickering light from a few dim bulbs barely revealed the path ahead. That's when I heard distant chanting, something rhythmic and mysterious. Curiosity got the better of me, and I followed the sounds. There, hidden behind a crumbling brick wall, I witnessed a group of people in the midst of a ritual. It wasn't your usual tourist-friendly voodoo show. This felt authentic, primal. The air was heavy with the scent of incense, and shadows danced around the flickering candles. At the center, a hooded figure chanted incantations in a language I couldn't comprehend. The others swayed to an unseen rhythm, eyes gleaming with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. I tried to back away quietly, not wanting to disturb whatever was going on, but fate had other plans. As I turned to leave, my foot hit a loose brick, sending it clattering across the ground. The hooded figure stopped chanting, and everyone turned to stare at me. I froze, feeling like an intruder who stumbled upon something forbidden. Without a word, the hooded figure approached me. The atmosphere crackled with an energy I couldn't explain. It was as if the very air hummed with ancient forces. The figure lifted the hood, revealing piercing eyes that seemed to see into my soul. In a voice that resonated with an otherworldly power, the figure spoke. You've trespassed into the sacred, unknowingly crossing the threshold. Now, the spirits demand payment. I didn't know what they meant, but fear gnawed at me as they placed a small object in my hand, a charm, they called it. With a stern warning, they told me it would bind me to the spirits, ensuring that the debt was paid. Confused and shaken, I left the alley, thinking it was just some elaborate performance. But that charm, it felt real, and I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that I had become a part of something beyond my understanding. Days later, back in my mundane life, strange things started happening. Shadows moved when they shouldn't, and the air seemed charged with an unseen presence. It wasn't just in my head. Something had followed me from that alley in New Orleans. Sleep became elusive as whispers echoed in the dark corners of my room. The charm weighed heavy in my pocket, a constant reminder of a debt I didn't understand. Fear became my constant companion, and I questioned my sanity. As weeks passed, the encounters escalated. Objects moved on their own, and the air became thick with an unseen force. I sought help, consulting experts who dismissed it as stress or an overactive imagination. But the events persisted, driving me to the edge of sanity. In desperation, I returned to New Orleans, seeking answers from the very alley that had changed everything. The air was thick with an ancient energy, and the flickering light revealed the same crumbling brick wall. But this time, the alley was empty, devoid of the mysterious ritual and the hooded figure. I stood there, realizing that I had become a pawn in a game played by forces beyond my comprehension. The charm, a token of a debt paid to the spirits, had bound me to a world where the line between reality and the supernatural blurred. As I left that alley for the second time, I couldn't escape the feeling that the shadows still followed, that the unseen forces lingered, and that my encounter with the hidden voodoo ritual had opened a door to something I could never fully understand. There we were, me and the gang, all pumped up for this camping trip in the Florida Everglades. Figured it would be a wild adventure, you know, the usual stuff: campfires, marshmallows, and some good old swamp tales. Little did we know, things were about to take a turn for the worse. We set up camp in this remote spot, surrounded by the eerie quiet of the Everglades. The air was thick, and the darkness of the swamp seemed to swallow us whole as soon as the sun dipped below the horizon. On our second night, we heard stories from other campers about a swamp trapper known in the area. Old-timers whispered that this guy had a violent past, tangled up in some murky stuff. Being the fearless group we thought we were, we laughed it off, thinking it was just some local legend to spice up the trip. But then, the atmosphere shifted. We started noticing strange sounds in the night, rustling in the marshes, distant splashes, and sometimes even footsteps. Uninvited chills crawled up our spines as we huddled around the campfire, exchanging nervous glances. One evening, as the sun dipped low, we saw him, a silhouette emerging from the shadows. The swamp trapper, a weathered figure with eyes that seemed to hold tales of 1,000 dark nights. He didn't say much, just mumbled something about the swamp being his domain and the rules we needed to follow. We thought, hey, no big deal. Just a local eccentric. But that night, things escalated. Strange occurrences became the norm. Our food went missing, and our tent seemed to be tampered with. Paranoia crept in as we questioned each other, suspecting one another of pranks. Then, it got worse. One of us woke up to find eerie symbols scratched onto their tent, symbols none of us recognized. Panic set in, and we started hearing whispers in the night, whispers that seemed to seep into our very souls. We confronted the swamp trapper, thinking he was behind it all. He denied any involvement, but his eyes, they told a different story. There was a darkness in them, a darkness that sent shivers down our spines. As tension rose, so did the stakes. The swamp, once our playground, became a menacing maze. Every rustle, every shadow had us on edge. We were no longer a group of friends on a camping trip. We were prisoners in a swamp with a trapper whose violent past hinted at a menace we couldn't comprehend. One night, it all came to a head. The whispers grew louder, and the air turned suffocating. We stumbled upon the swamp trapper's camp, hidden deep in the heart of the Everglades. And that's when we saw evidence of a dark past, trophies from the swamp that told a tale of violence. The trapper, he snapped. The darkness in his eyes turned into a storm of rage. We found ourselves running through the swamp, our hearts pounding louder than the whispers. Each step was a gamble, the murky water hiding who knew what beneath its surface. He was after us, fueled by some twisted vendetta, and we were just prey in his swampy domain. The moon cast an eerie glow on the twisted branches, our breaths echoing in the oppressive silence. Fear, raw and unfiltered, gripped us, and survival instincts kicked in. We split up, weaving through the labyrinth of mangroves and murky waters. Every splash, every snap of a twig sent shivers through our exhausted bodies. The swamp, once serene, became a chaotic battleground where fear was our only companion. As the night wore on, we regrouped, battered and bruised. The swamp trapper, relentless, pursued us like a shadowy specter. It was a fight for our lives, a desperate struggle to escape the clutches of a man whose violent past had intertwined with our supposedly innocent camping trip. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, we stumbled upon a ranger station. Gasping for breath, we told our harrowing tale to the authorities. They went out to search for the swamp trapper, but the Everglades swallowed him whole, leaving behind the murky secrets of his violent past. We left that swamp, changed forever. All right, buckle up for this one. It was a few years back, and I was knee-deep in investigative journalism, digging into unsolved crimes in this small Arkansas town. Now, picture this, a town so quiet you could hear the rustle of leaves in the wind. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, or so it seemed. So, there I am, snooping around, trying to piece together the puzzle of these mysterious crimes. People disappearing, strange happenings, and a general unease lingering in the air. The sheriff, a guy who looked like he had seen a few too many sunsets, caught my attention. Seemed like a decent enough guy, but there was something off about him. Call it journalist's intuition. The first break came when I stumbled upon a series of hushed conversations in the local diner. Whispers about the sheriff being present at the scene of some of these unsolved crimes. Now, I'm not one to jump to conclusions, but curiosity had me by the collar. I started poking around, asking questions, and the more I probed, the thicker the air of suspicion became. The sheriff, with his poker face and vague answers, was hiding something. But what? One night, I caught wind of an old-timer, whiskey-soaked and grizzled, who claimed he had a tale to tell. A tale of the sheriff's dark past, a past intertwined with the very crimes I was investigating. The bar was dimly lit, shadows dancing in the corners as the old-timer spilled the beans. According to him, the sheriff had a personal vendetta, a twisted sense of justice that blurred the lines between lawman and perpetrator. It all started years ago, some local dispute gone terribly wrong. The sheriff, fueled by vengeance, took justice into his own hands. And justice, in his eyes, meant a string of unsolved crimes, each a piece of his twisted puzzle. Armed with this newfound knowledge, I started connecting the dots. The disappearances, the oddities, all tied back to the sheriff's quest for what he considered retribution. It sent shivers down my spine, realizing that the person entrusted with upholding the law was the puppet master behind the town's dark secrets. Things took a turn when the sheriff caught wind of my investigation. Suddenly, the shadows seemed to have eyes, and every creak of a floorboard echoed with a sinister undertone. He didn't take kindly to me unraveling his carefully woven tapestry of crime. Late one night, as I sifted through old case files in the dusty archives, I heard footsteps behind me. Cold sweat trickled down my spine as I turned to find the sheriff, his eyes devoid of any trace of humanity. The air thickened with tension, and I knew I had stepped into the lion's den. He didn't need words. His gaze told me everything. I was onto something he couldn't afford to let out. Fear gripped me as he reached for his holster, the metallic rasp of the gun sending a chill through the dimly lit room. Panic set in, and I made a run for it, the weight of truth heavier than the pounding of my heart. The chase that ensued through the darkened streets of that small town felt like a nightmare. I dodged alleys, darted through shadows, the relentless footsteps of the sheriff haunting my every move. It was a game of cat and mouse, and I was the mouse with nowhere to hide. As I reached the outskirts of town, exhaustion setting in, I stumbled upon the answer to the sheriff's malevolence. A hidden lair, a place where he orchestrated his dark symphony. Evidence, chilling and undeniable, lined the walls, a twisted tribute to his quest for justice. The sheriff closed in, the moon casting an eerie glow on his determined face. I had a choice to make: expose the truth and risk becoming another name on his list, or escape and let the darkness continue its reign. In a desperate bid for survival, I slipped through the shadows, leaving that town with the weight of its secrets etched into my soul. Alright, here goes. So, I'm down here in South Carolina, just trying to get through life after losing my husband. You know, the routine stuff, staring at the ceiling, trying to find some solace in reruns of old TV shows, and enduring the hollow condolences from well-meaning neighbors. The loneliness is suffocating, but you learn to live with it, or so they say. One day, a friend suggested I visit the local funeral home to pick up my husband's ashes. Sounded like a straightforward errand, right? I mustered the courage and drove down there, a small nondescript building on the outskirts of town. The air inside felt heavy with grief, the kind you can't escape no matter how far you run. I approached the front desk, and the funeral director, a middle-aged guy with an unsettlingly calm demeanor, greeted me. We exchanged a few words, and he handed me a small urn containing my husband's remains. Cold comfort in a ceramic jar. As I thanked him and turned to leave, that's when things started to feel off. The funeral director, let's call him Mr. Hollow Eyes, insisted on walking me to the door. His gaze never wavered, like he was staring straight through me. I tried to shake off the unease, chalked it up to grief playing tricks on my mind. As we reached the door, he casually mentioned how he understood loss, how he, too, had experienced the pain of saying goodbye to someone close. A sympathetic nod, a slight smile, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story, something he wasn't saying. Days went by, and the encounter with Mr. Hollow Eyes lingered in the back of my mind like a haunting melody. The funeral home became a place I avoided, the heaviness of the air too much to bear. Yet, curiosity gnawed at me, urging me to uncover the mystery behind that unsettling encounter. Late one evening, when the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows stretched across the town, I drove by the funeral home. It stood silent, a looming presence in the darkness. My instincts urged me to leave, but a strange compulsion pushed me forward. I slipped into the back entrance, the door creaking as I stepped into the dimly lit corridor. The air seemed colder, and a sense of foreboding settled over me. I moved quietly, my breath catching with every step, as if the building itself held secrets in its walls. I stumbled upon a room with a partially open door, light spilling from within. Peeking inside, my heart pounded in my chest. There, surrounded by flickering candles, was Mr. Hollow Eyes, dressed in funeral director attire, chanting something low and guttural. My husband's urn was placed on an altar-like table, and the realization struck me like a lightning bolt. This wasn't just a funeral home, it was a place of rituals, of something beyond the scope of my understanding. Fear paralyzed me as I witnessed Mr. Hollow Eyes, his calm demeanor replaced by a fervent intensity, as if he communed with forces unseen. I turned to leave, my mind screaming for escape, but my foot knocked against a stray object, sending it clattering to the floor. The ritual abruptly halted, and Mr. Hollow Eyes' gaze locked onto mine. The room seemed to freeze, the air thickening with an otherworldly tension. In that moment, I fled, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I raced through the dark corridors, the funeral home now a labyrinth of fear. Mr. Hollow Eyes' voice echoed behind me, chanting words that felt like icy fingers reaching for my soul. I burst through the back door, gasping for breath as the night air embraced me. The funeral home loomed behind, its secrets still hidden in the shadows. I never looked back, vowing never to return to that place of unsettling rituals and the funeral director with eyes that held more than just sympathy. So, me and the family, we decide to move into this old plantation home. Big place, got that old charm, you know? Needs some fixing up, but it's ours now. Anyway, we're all excited, thinking we're gonna make a fresh start. Now, this place comes with a groundskeeper, a guy named Ned. He's been around forever, and his family's been tied to this land for generations. They got some deep roots, if you catch my drift. People say his ancestors were involved in some dark stuff, like part of the old plantation owners who did some really messed up things back in the day. First few days, things are okay. Ned's doing his groundskeeper thing, keeping the place in check. But there's something off about him, you know? He's got this stare that makes your skin crawl. Like, he knows more about this house than he's letting on. One evening, we gather in the living room, talking about maybe letting Ned go. His vibes are weird, and we're not sure we want him hanging around. But when we bring it up, he gets all defensive, almost angry. Begs us to let him stay, saying he's the best for the job, knows the land better than anyone. We give in, reluctantly, and that's when things start getting creepy. Late at night, we hear noises, like footsteps in the hallways. We check, but there's no one there. Kids say they see shadows moving in their rooms, and the dog, he's growling at empty corners. I tell myself it's just an old house settling, but it don't feel right. Ned's always around, lurking in the shadows. You catch glimpses of him when you least expect it, his eyes like two burning coals in the darkness. He's working on hours, doing who knows what in the basement. We don't pry, but the air feels thick with secrets. One day, the kids tell us they found something in the backyard. It's an old, tattered journal buried near the roots of the ancient oak tree. Pages are yellow, filled with sketches and strange symbols. The kids can't make sense of it, but it feels like a piece of Ned's family history. That night, we decide enough is enough. We call Ned into the living room, tell him we appreciate his work, but it's time for him to move on. He doesn't take it well, to say the least. His eyes, those damn burning coals, they narrow into a glare. He leaves without a word, but I swear I hear him whispering something under his breath. After that, things go from creepy to downright unsettling. Doors creak open in the dead of night, footsteps echo through empty hallways. We see Ned in the garden, even though we fired him. He's just standing there, staring up at our bedroom window. One evening, the kids swear they see figures in the shadows, people from a bygone era. Faces twisted in pain and anger, echoing the dark history of this place. We start locking doors, checking windows, but the air feels charged with a malevolent energy. One night, we wake up to the sound of chanting. It's coming from the basement, that place Ned spent so much time in. We go down, heart pounding, and find him surrounded by candles, that old journal open in his hands. His eyes are wide, vacant, and he's muttering something in a language I can't understand. We don't stick around. Grab the kids, grab what we can, and bolt out of there. Leave the old plantation house, leave Ned with his creepy rituals and dark family history. As we drive away, I swear I see him standing in the doorway, watching us go with those burning coals for eyes. We find a new place, far away from that old plantation. The kids stop having nightmares, the dog relaxes, and we try to put it all behind us. Me and my girl, we decide to take this road trip through Tennessee. Figured it'd be a nice change of pace, exploring the back roads, you know? Just enjoying the scenic views and the small town charm. We're driving along, no real plan, just taking whatever road looks interesting. Somewhere in the middle of nowhere, we see this old guy by the side of the road. Looks like a character straight out of a movie. Overalls, gray beard, the whole deal. He waves us down, so we figure he needs help or something. Pull over, and he approaches the car. Turns out, he's a moonshiner, been making that stuff for decades. Claims it's the best in the whole state. Tells us about his little operation tucked away in the hills, offering to show us the process. We're curious, right? So, we decide, why not? Follow him down these winding, narrow roads. Trees on both sides, making a tunnel of branches overhead. It's like we're in a whole different world. The guy, he's talking about his family's moonshining legacy, how they've been doing it since Prohibition. Seems proud of it. We get to this hidden spot, his makeshift distillery nestled among the trees. Barrels everywhere, that sharp smell of alcohol in the air. It's all rustic and charming, you know, like an old-timey movie set. But that's when things start getting weird. As he's showing us the process, he starts getting this unsettling look in his eyes. Like he's sizing us up, and it hits me, maybe he's not as friendly as he seems. My girl and I exchange glances, and we start thinking it's time to leave. Politely thank him for the tour, but he insists we try his latest batch. We agree, not wanting to offend the guy, and he hands us these mason jars filled with his special blend. We take a sip, and it's strong, burns going down. He's watching us, that unsettling look never leaving his eyes. We play it cool, say it's good, and try to make our exit. But that's when things take a turn. He gets this wild look in his eyes, like a switch flipped in his head. Starts accusing us of being undercover agents or competitors trying to steal his recipe. We try to calm him down, telling him we're just travelers, but he ain't having it. Out of nowhere, he pulls a shotgun from behind a barrel, and that's when the whole picturesque road trip goes straight to hell. We're running back to the car, heart pounding, and he's shouting at us. Bullets hitting the ground around us. Never thought a leisurely road trip would turn into a life or death situation. We peel out of there, tires screeching, adrenaline pumping. He's chasing us for a while, but we manage to lose him in the winding back roads. We don't stop until we're far away, heart still racing, realizing we narrowly escaped something way darker than a simple moonshine tour. After that, the picturesque road trip loses its charm. Every turn, every rustling of leaves makes us jump. We can't shake the feeling that the old moonshiner is still out there in those hills, watching, waiting. I'm this journalist, right? Got assigned to investigate this historic cemetery in South Carolina. Seemed like a straightforward gig, you know? Historic cemetery, maybe a few interesting tombstones, some local history, easy peasy. I roll up to this cemetery, and it's old, like really old. Headstones dating back to the 1800s, moss-covered and leaning like they're tired of standing for so long. I figure I'll chat with the caretaker, get some background info. The guy, his name's Carl, looks like he's been tending to this place for decades. Carl's this wiry old fellow with sunken eyes that have seen too much. Gives off this vibe like he's got secrets buried deeper than the graves he's tending. I start asking him about the history of the cemetery, and he's got stories, man. Tales of families long gone, tragedies, and all that jazz. Now, here's where it gets weird. Carl, he's not just a caretaker. He's like a historian, but not the friendly, bookish type. More like the obsessed, can't let go type. Every name on those gravestones, he knows the whole story. Who died when, how, why. It's like he's got the entire cemetery's life story in his head. I start noticing strange things during our chat. His fingers, they're stained with soil like he's been digging recently. And his eyes, they light up when he talks about the deceased, like he's sharing a secret. I chalk it up to an old guy being passionate about his job, you know? But then, as we're strolling through the cemetery, Carl starts pointing out specific graves. He tells me he talks to them, the dead, like they're still here. And not just casual chit-chat, no, he's having full-on conversations. Claims they talk back in whispers carried by the wind. Now, I'm a journalist, not a paranormal investigator, but this is getting under my skin. Carl, he's mumbling to the graves, and I'm standing there, feeling like an intruder in some bizarre ritual. I try to steer the conversation back to the history, the tangible stuff. But Carl, he's fixated on this one particular grave. Says it's his favorite. A woman from the 19th century, died young, and he's practically confessing his love for her. I'm thinking, okay, buddy, you've crossed the line from passionate to downright creepy. As the sun sets, he invites me to witness something. He pulls out a shovel from behind a mausoleum and starts digging at that favorite grave. I'm frozen, watching him unearth the past like it's no big deal. My journalist instincts are screaming, this is messed up, get out. But then, I see it, a decaying hand emerging from the soil. My stomach churns. Carl's muttering to the corpse, calling it by name. I bolt, running faster than I knew I could, leaving the cemetery and Carl's madness behind. That night, I file a report, exposing Carl's unholy communion with the dead. The authorities shut him down, but the image of that hand reaching for the surface, the whispering tombstones, it haunts my dreams. So me and the guys, we're into this urban exploring thing, you know? Find an old place, sneak in, see what's left behind. This time, we hit up this abandoned asylum in Mississippi. Creepy as hell from the outside, broken windows, overgrown weeds, the works. We're thinking it's just a cool place to poke around, snap some pics. But man, the moment we step inside, this place hits different. Dark, musty, like the air's thicker than it should be. First thing we notice, those old hospital beds, rusted and creaking. We're cracking jokes, trying to keep it light, but something feels off. Like, there's this heaviness hanging in the air, and it's not just the dust. We find these old patient records scattered around, names, dates, all that. Place was like a time capsule, frozen in some twisted era. Then, we stumble onto this room. Medical equipment everywhere, like a mad scientist's lab. We find these journals, and they're talking about experiments, messed up stuff. Doctor's name was Mitchell, and he was doing things to patients that should have never happened. Reading through those journals, it's like peeling back layers of horror. Shock therapy, experimental drugs, lobotomies, you name it. Patients weren't just patients, they were guinea pigs in this twisted lab of despair. We're freaking out, realizing we've stepped into a nightmare. Trying to wrap our heads around it, but there's no making sense of the madness. These poor souls were subjected to the kind of stuff you'd see in a horror movie. Pictures of the patients, their eyes hollow, expressions vacant. It's like you can feel the pain etched into their faces. We're taking photos, documenting every inch of that hellhole, feeling like we've uncovered some dark secret. As we're about to bail and report this insanity to the cops, that's when it gets even crazier. We hear footsteps, echoes down the hall. At first, we think it's just the wind playing tricks, but it's rhythmic, deliberate. Suddenly, this figure appears at the end of the corridor. A guy in a lab coat, disheveled, like he just stepped out of a time machine from the twisted past of this asylum. Dr. Mitchell, or his ghost, or whatever, staring right at us. We freeze, like deer caught in headlights. Dude starts walking towards us, slow, deliberate. We're inching back, heartbeats pounding in our ears. And then, he speaks, this raspy voice like it's been drowned in suffering. Leave, he says, just that one word, but it echoes in the silence like a command from the depths of insanity. We don't need to be told twice. We book it out of there, adrenaline pumping, legs moving faster than they ever have. Once we're out, we call the cops, spill everything. They show up, and we guide them through the asylum, show them the horrors we found. They're in shock, too, faces pale, probably not expecting this level of messed up. We hand over our pics, journals, everything. Cops thank us, but you can see it in their eyes, like they can't believe what they're seeing. They assure us they'll investigate, but we're left standing there, minds buzzing with the things we've witnessed. Days later, news breaks out. The police shut down the place, launch a full investigation. Turns out, Dr. Mitchell wasn't just some madman in our pics. He was real, and he did all those sick experiments. Place gets sealed off, like a dark stain wiped clean. We did our part, right? Shared the truth, exposed the horror. Me and the gang, we decide to go camping in the Florida Everglades. You know, thinking it's gonna be all fun and games, nature, and chilling by the fire. We set up our tents, crack some beers, and start enjoying the swampy atmosphere. Everything's cool, or so we think. Night rolls in, and we're gathered around the fire, laughing, sharing stories. That's when we hear it, this rustling in the bushes. We brush it off, like it's the Everglades, right? Probably just some critters doing their thing. But as the night creeps on, the rustling doesn't stop. It's like there's someone or something lurking in the shadows. We can't shake this feeling that we're being watched. A couple of us suggest it's just our imagination, but deep down, we know it's not. We decide to turn in for the night, get into our tents, zip them up tight. That's when things take a turn. We hear footsteps, heavy ones, not like an animal, more like a person. Panic sets in, but we're trying to play it cool, you know, pretending we're not scared out of our minds. Then, this figure appears outside our campsite, wearing a swamp ranger uniform. We're relieved, thinking maybe he's here to check on us, make sure we're not breaking any camping rules. But the vibe he's giving off, it's off, like a shiver down your spine kinda off. He starts asking questions, normal stuff at first, like if we've seen any gators or snakes. We're nodding, trying to be friendly, but his eyes, man, they're intense, like he's sizing us up. And that's when the questions take a dark turn. He starts asking about our plans, where we're heading, what routes we're taking. It's like he's trying to piece together something we don't even know. We're getting uneasy, realizing this ranger isn't here to help. He's here for something else. He leans in, whispers something about dangerous folks in the swamp, warns us to stay close, stay together. But the way he says it, it's not a warning, it's a threat. Like, if we don't listen, something bad's gonna happen. We're freaked out, contemplating packing up and getting the hell out of there. But then he says something that freezes our blood. He mentions a series of disappearances, folks who camped in these parts and were never seen again. And he's looking at us like we're the next chapter in that messed up story. We decide to play along, act like we're buying into his warnings. Inside the tents, we're whispering, making a plan to ditch this place the moment he's out of sight. But that's when it gets worse. We notice more figures emerging from the shadows, other rangers, or what look like rangers. They're not here to protect, they're part of something sinister. We're surrounded, and the swamp ranger, he's grinning like he's got us right where he wants us. As he walks away, disappearing into the darkness, we seize the moment, grab our stuff, and bolt. It's pitch black, and we're stumbling through the swamp, branches grabbing at us, mud sucking us in. Panic's setting in, and we can still hear those footsteps behind us, like the swamp's closing in on us. Eventually, we break through the tree line, gasping for air. We don't stop until we're miles away from the cursed campsite. As the sun rises, we look at each other, realizing how close we came to being part of those swamp disappearances. We report the whole messed up encounter to the authorities, but there's this nagging fear that maybe those swamp rangers, or whatever they were, are still out there. So, there we were, a bunch of us friends, hiking through the thick woods of Arkansas. Just thinking it's gonna be a typical nature adventure, you know? Birds chirping, trees rustling, good times. Little did we know, we were in for something way beyond our pay grade. We started hearing rumors from locals about this preacher dude deep in the woods. Said he had this church hidden away, preaching some weird stuff. Being curious idiots, we thought, hey, why not check it out? Could be a quirky detour in our hiking plans. So, we venture deeper, following the whispers of the woods. That's when we stumble upon this clearing, and there he is, the preacher. Tall guy, long beard, eyes that look like they've seen too much. He welcomes us like we're old pals, but there's something off, you know? Like, behind the warm smile, there's a darkness lurking. He starts preaching, talking about sins and redemption, all the typical religious stuff. But the way he's saying it, it's like he's weaving a spell, and we're falling under it. We're listening, nodding, but our minds are getting foggy. Reality starts to blur, and this feeling of unease settles in. The preacher, he's got this charisma, this magnetic pull. Next thing we know, he's telling us our sins, personal stuff we never shared. It's like he's reading our souls. We're freaking out, wondering how he knows all this. And he just keeps smiling, telling us we need his guidance to cleanse our tainted spirits. As the day goes on, we're getting more entangled in his words, like puppets on his strings. The woods, once familiar, start warping around us. Shadows dance, and every rustle feels like a sinister whisper. It's like the preacher's words are rewriting the reality we thought we knew. We try to leave, but it's like an invisible force is holding us back. Every step feels heavier, like we're sinking into the forest floor. Panic sets in, and that preacher, he's there, urging us to stay, telling us we're safer under his wing. Days pass, or maybe it's hours. Times become this hazy concept. We're losing track of ourselves, our identities slipping away. The preacher's sermons echo in our minds, drowning out our thoughts. We're not ourselves anymore. We're becoming vessels for his twisted beliefs. Then comes the breaking point. One of our friends, he starts laughing, this unsettling, maniacal laughter. It spreads like a virus, infecting us. We're all laughing, but it's not joy, it's madness. The preacher's words have cracked something inside us, and now we're spiraling into a dark abyss. We snap out of it, realizing we need to break free. The preacher's hold on us is strong, but we muster every ounce of willpower to resist. It's a struggle, like tearing ourselves from quicksand, but we manage to stumble out of that cursed clearing. As we emerge from the woods, the preacher's voice fades, but the laughter lingers. We're left questioning what was real and what was his dark influence. For some context, I am a 34-year-old author from New York. Got this novel in mind, thought it'd be a breeze. Figured I'd do some research, get the vibe of this secluded Georgia town. Small, quiet, the kind where everyone knows everyone's business. First day, I'm at this diner, chatting up the locals. Seemed friendly enough, folks telling me about the town's history, the usual stuff. Got this notebook, scribbling down names, dates, the raw material for my novel. As I'm digging deeper, I hear whispers about this pact, like a secret club or something. They're real hush-hush, dodging my questions with awkward smiles. I start smelling a story, something beyond the usual small-town charm. Late one night, I'm at this bar, and this guy, Tom, he's a few drinks in, spills the beans. Tells me about this pact, a deal with the devil or whatever. They trade stories for success, prosperity, and all that jazz. At first, I'm thinking, yeah, right, crazy talk. But then, Tom gets this haunted look, like he's seen things. Tells me stories he shouldn't know, personal stuff, like he's tapped into the town's collective consciousness. It sends shivers down my spine. Now, I'm intrigued. I want to see this pact in action, so I stick around. People start avoiding me, like they know I'm onto something. My research takes me to this old library with dusty books and creaky floors. In the archives, I find this ancient tome. Written accounts of the town's history, eerily accurate, like they knew the future. That's when it hits me. The stories they tell, they come true. I'm thinking, okay, I've stumbled into some Twilight Zone plot. As I'm trying to connect the dots, strange things start happening. Characters from my novel, they're popping up in the town. I didn't write them here, but they're real, walking, talking, breathing. Freaks me out, man. The townsfolk, they're acting like my characters are long-lost friends. They've embraced them, like they were always meant to be here. I'm caught in this surreal loop, fiction bleeding into reality, and it's getting harder to tell where the novel ends and the town begins. One night, I'm walking the quiet streets, and I see the townspeople gathered in some secret meeting. They're chanting, candles flickering in the dark. I hear my characters' names, my novel's plot, like they're invoking them into existence. It hits me like a freight train. The stories I've written, they're becoming real, living among the locals. The pact, it's more than a twisted fantasy. It's a force that shapes reality based on the tales they tell. I confront them, demand answers. They're smirking, proud of their twisted power. They see me as the unwitting creator, the puppeteer of their fate. The more they reveal, the more I realize how deeply entangled I am in this web of dark storytelling. Now, I'm desperate to break free, to unwrite the horror I've unleashed. But the pact, it's ancient, ingrained in the town's fabric. My characters, they're not characters anymore, they're walking nightmares. I try leaving, but the town won't let me. It's like I'm trapped in my own creation. Every step feels like a plot twist, a chapter leading to a terrifying climax. I'm the outsider turned unwitting puppeteer, and the lines between fiction and reality are fading fast. The townspeople, they've become characters in their own tragic tales. Each whispered word, each recounted detail, it shapes their destiny in ways I never intended. My attempt to escape this nightmare only deepens the horror, as the town rewrites itself with every step I take. I scribble furiously in my notebook, trying to rewrite the narrative, but it's futile. The more I write, the darker the tale becomes. The characters I once crafted as mere words on paper now roam the streets, twisted embodiments of my imagination turned monstrous reality. As the night unfolds, the stories converge into a nightmarish climax. The town, once quaint, becomes a stage for the horrific consequences of my words. The townsfolk, driven by the pact, enact scenes of despair and agony, each tale playing out with visceral intensity. And then it hits me, the ultimate twist. I'm not the author anymore. I'm just another character in this twisted narrative. The pact, the stories, they've consumed me, turning my presence in the town into a tragic subplot. As the first light of dawn breaks, I realize I need to escape, and when I do, my life has already changed forever.